spectrum frontiers. Riding hard, standing tall. From the heart of the people to the rise and the fall. Full spectrum frontiers. Where the stories ignite. Guarding tomorrow with grit in the fight.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we're talking to Jenny Chan from the Pacific Atrocities Education Center. Is that what?
Yeah. We're a nonprofit.
Gotcha. So it's Pacific.Atrocities.org.
Yes.
So it's an organization dedicated to documenting the forgotten and suppressed history of wartime atrocities in the Asia-Pacific theater. We often think of national security as weapons, troops, like troop numbers, ships, and alliances, but national security is also memory. It's culture, it's trauma, it's how a society processes what has happened to it. And in the Indo-Pacific today, history is not the past. It shapes strategy, fear, legitimacy, propaganda, and alliances that are going on right now. So, Jenny, welcome to Full Spectrum Frontiers.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
This is great and I'm so thankful that you actually responded to my email.
No, it's something that I'm a full disclosure, I was a Marine, a U.S. Marine. So I have a affinity for Pacific history because of World War II specifically. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, yes, I have to talk to her.
Yeah.
So
And,
what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on our website and also our Instagram, Pacific Atrocities EDU. And we also have a YouTube channel where I talk to James Bradley 2 times a month now. James Bradley wrote the Flags of Our Fathers, the very iconic photo on Iwo Jima. So if you're Marine, you're very familiar with that photo.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, which I mean, did that photo inspire you in any way to?
I mean, it's an inspirational photo, but when you go back and look at like what it was, it's hard to wrap your head around the loss of life and just the battles in general that went on in the Pacific during World War II. And it's one of those things that's not really, again, like this is kind of your whole point, right? It's a lot of it's not talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And Iwo Jima is bloody, but it's only like one episode. And I was reading about Canal, and it was so insane what they were going through. Like if they were missing down one man, then another man would go and hold down the gun.
Yeah.
And no one talks about that. And we think about like the United States as like a winning force in World War II. But we don't talk about like before 1943 when it was like really losing and how many men
really
were
bad.
down. And that's why let's go back. I founded this organization because I read about the 30 million people who perished in World War II, and it's not talked about. No one talks about it. And I was trying to find like a job to research about this part of history. But when I was learning about history in the United States, it was mostly just Hitler. And like we just learned about Hitler, but the United States was very involved in the Pacific, especially after Pearl Harbor. And even before Pearl Harbor, it was funding China in resisting Japan.
Yeah.
But that's not really talked about. And my husband's like grandma family side of the family, she had a cousin who was doing island hopping campaign, and he passed away doing island hopping campaign. And it's just so incredible how much like of that military history is kind of just erased and forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good movie stuff like the Pacific that HBO did. That I think it was Steven Spielberg, but it's the same people that did Band of Brothers also did that show Pacific. But it only shows you like the littlest sliver of what actually happened and how then that all morphed into Korea as well. And how that, just not very long after, right? I mean, within a decade. So, but why do you think so much of the public conversation about World War II in Asia is just either forgotten? Another big one is distorted or minimized compared to Europe.
Can I go back to your first statement about HBO and the Pacific?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
want to go
sure.
into telling a story about that. So I do a podcast with James Bradley, who wrote The Fly Boys, who later Stephen bought the rights for HBO Pacific. And it was very fascinating that he was describing how he even found the Flyboy story. I don't know if you are familiar with that story.
Is that the Fighting Tigers story?
No, the Flyboy story is actually they were airmen going to Chichijima, and 8 airmen and got captured by the Japanese, and and then the airman who escaped was George Bush.
Oh, wow. Okay, then. Jeez.
And apparently, and then the other airmen who were captured were then eaten by the Japanese on Chichijima, and there was a so Bush could have been Bush Nugget.
So there's a book about this though, The Fly
Yeah,
Boys.
Fly Boys by James
Okay, I've got it
Bradley.
written down. I have to check it out now.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. And so I was asking James, like, hey, how do you even find the story? How do you even research for this? This sounds so obscure.
Right.
And he was telling me that this is such a funny story that, I mean, it's funny, but it's sad at the same time.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that apparently a guy called Iris Chang, who wrote The Rape of Nanking, and he wrote this, and the guy then called James and said, like, hey, I have the story for you. And at first he called Iris Chang. And then Iris Chang was like, no, this guy is too crazy for me. James, can you call him? And James called him, and the guy was like, oh yeah, I was at the secret war times trial, and I know about this, like these guys, these pilots who were eaten by the Japanese. And James said, wow, this could be a story. And then the next day he flew to this guy's to this guy in Iowa, and was at his living room uncovering this wartime trial. And then he called George Bush, and then George Bush said, yeah, I read your book. And so then George Bush then went to Chichijima with James Bradley. And then that's how James Bradley wrote the book Flyboys.
Wow. That is wild.
And so then and there was this whole war crime secret trial going on. Like the first thing James, after he heard about this, he then called all these pilots families, oh, did you know that your son or whatever, or your husband at the time was actually eaten by the Japanese soldiers? And then all these families were like, we had no idea. And then and so there you go. That's why some of these stories are so hidden, because of the secret war times trial. And also after the war, Japan was a key ally with the United States. And so then you don't want to make your ally look bad, right? For political reason.
Right.
So then a lot of these stories get undercover like that.
Man, this is stuff. Yeah. You can't even make this stuff up. It's so wild, a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
Man, I watched one of your YouTube. It was the one that's on the website, and it was talking about some of the human experimentation stuff that was going on in China, and just out of this, stuff that makes your head spin. You just, man.
It's all over. I mean, it was not just China too. I recently uncovered Yokohama trial, which was they were basically doing, what do you call it? Class B war criminal trial.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are not even class A war criminals, right? And I uncovered this whole episode of how in World War II, it was an intern summer project too, with my 2025 summer internship student. And we uncovered how in 1945, right before the war was ending, there was a group of pilots in B-29. B-29 is huge, so you need like a group of
Yeah.
11 airmen, and they were trying to bomb Tokyo, but then they got captured. And so then these villagers like captured these guys, and then like 4 guys I think died immediately, 4 or 5 guys died immediately. And then whoever was captured then they captured them, and then they brought them to Kyushu Imperial University. And then they did human experimentation. They like then took out their lungs and tried to like see how long they would last. And they did that in front of like a college lecture. So like you have to think like how many people, it's not just China and Korea, like how many people actually sacrificed them. Were sacrificed in
Yeah.
like the Japanese imperial like way. It was so intense. And so one of the airmen, this really stuck with me. They like tried to replace saline. They were trying to see if they can replace saline with seawater. And so then they did that. And then one of the nurse was a testimony in this Yokohama trial. It was so crazy when I was reading it. Like apparently one of the airmen thought that he was going to get saved because he was being pushed into a hospital. But little did he know that he was about to be subject of human experimentation. And like this Yokohama trial was not really released until like the 1970s. And in the 1970s, we're full-fledged into a Cold War. So of course we're not going to know about these stories. And right after like in the US occupied Japan, they were basically, using this kind of thing, like the research material to trade for immunity. Like these scientists knew how to trade for immunity right away. These
Yeah.
scientists who knew how to
Right.
do this kind of thing,
Well,
they're smart
they
guys.
also saw it happen with the German scientists. The same thing. They were basically trading
Operation
their
Paperclip.
knowledge for their life, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So this type of stuff, I'm one of the things I've really been studying a lot is like generational trauma, right? And when you talk about the Indo-Pacific today, so many analysts just all they do is focus on like, the military stuff, the ships, the missiles, and cyber stuff, cyber war and trade, right? Especially with what just happened in Venezuela. China took a huge hit with that. But from like your perspective, how does this historical trauma still shape the geopolitical landscape
Yeah. So
of the Southeast Asian,
and
area?
Asia in general. So
Yeah.
for example, right, it's so interesting that you asked this question. So in South Korea, they still have protests every Wednesday against Japan because South Korea was colonized by Japan for like decades, even before Pearl Harbor. And they face, of all the Asian region, they faced the Japanese brutality the longest because they were basically like, there were a lot of sex slaves that were
Yeah.
from South Korea. And so one time I went to South Korea for like a vacation, and then my Airbnb host was like, "Oh, you want to join me for a protest against the Japanese?" I'm like, "Wow, you guys
Right.
are still doing this." And so that's like an every Wednesday situation. And South Korea and Japan are supposed to be friends. Like when you see on media, they're
At
supposed to be
least
the
when
best
you
of
see it
friends.
from our view, right?
But there's still this like tension that like really draws that line, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize this until I started like researching more into World War II. And the World War II government that the United States funded eventually moved to Taiwan. And that's the KMT party and whatnot.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know about this. You know about this, but
Yeah.
not a lot of people know, especially people my generation. And so when I see it on the media, like about how this is the first time Taiwan buy whatever weapons, I'm like, wait, no, they were taking billions of dollars and they lost China and then they move over to Taiwan. Like, and this is not the first time that they're going to get money from us,
Right.
And so it's just, and so when you talk about media and like gaslighting and whatnot, that's like really the way it is. And also, like my grandma, even when she was alive, she would not let me watch anime and manga because she suffered like for 4 years under Japanese occupation. And like and her whole family, like money had to be traded in for military yen. And it's incredible how like this kind of like war memory and trauma can really shape people's like relationship today. So it doesn't really matter what like the media says. If people have a memory that is different than what the media is telling us, then we're not going to do whatever the media
Yeah.
is going to tell us to do.
I mean, it's wild because some of the things that I've been studying, literally, they've done studies just over the past year or two that show that generate that trauma like that, like trauma from famine and from war and, things like that actually can get passed down to your children and
Yeah.
your grandchildren. That trauma imprints itself on your actual DNA and
Wow.
triggers things. So you have this, it's not just a shared memory. I mean, it's literally in your DNA that you have this generational trauma from these
Yeah.
incidents. And that would, this is one of those like perfect examples of probably that this exists in a lot of the population in Korea and China and other places in the Pacific. Straight up. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, and it's very unfortunate because Japan to this day still go and worship their war criminals, right? And a lot of their Asian countries see that, their neighboring countries, they see that, and then they're like, "What are you guys doing? Like, you guys cause like tens of millions of death around Asia." And it's very unfortunate that like during Cold War, I think Eisenhower got the class A war criminal out, Kishi Nobusuke, and called him the biggest gamble in his political life, and turned him into the prime minister of Japan. So this guy Kishi Nobusuke oversaw Manchuria, and Manchuria was where Unit 731 was. Can I go into Manchuria? Is that
Oh,
cool?
sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Japan occupied Manchuria like 10 years before Pearl Harbor even happened. And and this also goes back to like human experimentation. When Ishishiro first like read about the Geneva Convention, he thought, wow, if the germs are so powerful that these people were writing rules about it, it must be something here. And so then he was trying to start a thing to research germs. People are born different. Some people are born more evil than others. I've come to
For
this
sure. Yes.
conclusion.
Absolutely.
And so he was trying to get the emperor's like attention. So he went on to produce this water filter, and because he knew that during the Russo-Japanese War, a lot of the Japanese troops died from like dirty water and whatnot. So for his demonstration, he peed into like this water filter, and then he drank from it. And then because it filtered his own water, and so the emperor was super impressed, and gave him funding for this endeavor. And then he turned really quickly into human experimentation and trying to like test out what is going to happen to humans and whatnot. And and then eventually and he was doing this in Tokyo, like, and when but it was just way too like out there to do that in like the capital of the country. So what happened is that when Japan finally captured Manchuria, and it was a false flag attack, Japan accused China of attacking their railway and whatnot, and then they went in and took Manchuria. And after they captured Manchuria, Ishishiro really saw like how the potential in doing this in Japan's colony instead of doing it in like Tokyo. And so then he did that, and then he took over at first he took over a soy sauce factory, and then he did human experimentation there. But then people got out and then started telling everyone else that they were doing human experimentation. And so then he thought, well, let's just go to a more remote area. So he took over a whole village, like 2.5 square mile, 100, and then he built like 150 buildings. And so then if you go to like Unit 731 Museum today, you can see how big that space was.
Mm.
And it's so fascinating to me that like he then put his brother in as a security guard to make sure no one gets out alive. So you never really know how many like people were being used as human experimentation. But then he also was able to like produce bombs and like flea bombs and also anthrax and like
So like
yeah,
biological stuff.
yeah, and like landers. It's like gross biological stuff. Um, and he had his own jet. He was like trying to test on like people. He would tie victims to the stakes and then like test how these biological weapons would like result in terms of how those people would react. And it's so fascinating that like he did that. I mean, who knows how long the war was? I mean, if the war had lasted any longer,
Yeah.
there'll have been way more victims, right? And talking about trauma and whatnot. So it was not just like human experimentation that he was just doing. It was he also did did what do you call it? Biological launching like full on biological warfare on like populations.
Gotcha.
So
Kind of like what Saddam did with like testing nerve agent and stuff.
but he did it on like a big population. So people know about like
Wow.
Doolittle raid and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you know about Doolittle raid. And
Yeah.
so they had like a one-way ticket to Japan. And in order to get out, you either land in China or you land in Russia. The guys who landed in Russia, they were captured by the Russians for like a while. But then the guys who landed in China were saved by the Chinese villagers. And so then when they got out, the Japanese Unit 731 did like a full-on revenge attack on this Zhejiang province in China, and they were spraying anthrax and glanders onto the population. And so there's like a full-on like it's very well documented now because one of the women who like grew up in the village like learned Japanese and English and was a translator living in Shanghai for a while. Then she realized what was happening to her village. And so then she took these villagers who had like rotten legs. Like these people's like legs were like rotten. Like if the sorry about that.
No, it's just gross.
It is very gross. And is it okay for me to go on?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so then if they got like more infected, right, their limbs would even fall off. And so then they lost their livelihood. So it's not just like interracial trauma, they lost their livelihood.
Yeah.
And then they went to court to sue for decades. And like it wasn't until like 2014 that they figure out how to do skin grafting to like cure that kind of skin
Injury. Yeah.
rotting, and it smells bad. And
Yeah.
like the Japanese court then admitted that they did Unit 731, like that this biological weapons like warfare was real. But then they never compensated these guys who lost their ability to earn money for like decades after the war, and from this kind of unit. And so it's just like people have these kind of memories in Asia about what had happened to them by Japanese. And so then like how can you have media gaslight them about you guys need to turn against whatever.
Yeah. Or just forget about it.
Right. No.
I find that so this is this podcast, I call it a national security podcast, but national security talk gets abstract really, really fast, right? So your work centers the human cost. And I love that because as not just like national security, but part of national security is leadership, right? So what do like modern leaders risk forgetting when history becomes purely, it drives me crazy because history becomes purely strategic rather than human. And these are these stories that change, that remind us of how horrible war is, especially. So, what do modern leaders risk forgetting when this history becomes purely strategic instead of them focusing on the human stories?
I mean, you
Can you,
risk another war. It's so interesting because Japan had Article 9 after the war, right?
yep,
And I mean, I don't mean to pick on Japan, but they often go to have these like peace loving shrine and museums and
mhm,
whatnot, as in they cherry pick this like atomic bomb history. And it's like, but what about what happened before 1945, right? Like, had the
right,
war gone
yeah,
on, then it would have been, I'm not going to say like, oh, should we have dropped the bomb? I think the war was going to be over sooner than later because of Soviet Union going in with Operation August Storm, right?
yeah,
But at the same time, you cherry pick that one part of history. And I recently realized that like the atomic bomb death toll was actually less than what they did in 6 weeks in Rape of Nanking. And in the 6 weeks, they were doing it by bayoneting and sword and like machine gunning, which I think, in my
yeah,
opinion, is way more brutal. And I mean, I think there was like some numbers on the internet that like if the war didn't end, it will have been like thousands of deaths per day.
yeah,
And yeah, so people don't realize that like when you cherry pick history, you like it's actually very dangerous because it just keeps going into like a direction that's going to repeat history itself. And right now, the Article 9 says that Japan cannot militarize and whatever unless there is like a national like emergency. And so I think they're going to maybe use a national emergency, right? Because now they're buying weapons and they're cherry picking history, in my
yeah.
opinion.
No, I would agree. I mean, their navy is massive. It is.
I know.
So it's like, that they call it the Japanese Defense Force, but it's some of the
And when Obama, I normally don't talk about politics, but I think this
right.
is over 10 years now, so I can talk about it. When Obama did pivot to Asia, the first thing he did was to go to Japan and apologize about atomic bomb.
Mm, yeah.
So then
I do
he
remember
can,
that.
yeah, so then he can use this also to repeat history itself. That's just my estimation. And so so when you talk about national security without knowing like the history, that to itself is very sickening. And also, it's not like Japan and the United States had like great relationship during the war either. Like I see it on TikTok and Instagram all the time. A lot of Gen Zs don't know history. And when they were like someone on TikTok the other day I saw even thought that China attacked Pearl Harbor. And, and it's so wild to me. I was reading the statistics, and apparently you're like 70% more likely to die in a Japanese POW camp than you are in like a Nazi
Yeah.
POW
Right.
camp. And so and it's so fascinating because I don't know if you read this book, The Death Factory. In edition 1, he mentioned that the POWs, I mean, Japan was using Americans as human experimentation. Then there
Yeah.
was a Congress hearing right after he released the book, and then they like were like, "Oh, there's really no American human experimentation and whatnot." But I realized from Yokohama trial that there was, and that's just a small scale of it. And in addition to, he was like required to take this whole part of the book away. So he
Mm,
removed the part about Americans being used as human experimentation. So like when you're talking about like people talking about national security, it really gets abstract really fast because national security depends on who is a political ally and who's not a political ally really fast. And then they forget about history. They cherry pick history, and then they want the history to become their narrative. And I
yeah.
think that itself is very dangerous. And people who talk about culture and history and society, they really need, especially the media today, they really need to figure out like what they're talking about before they spill out all this BS.
Yeah. What was that movie? Unbreakable.
Yeah,
I mean, that right there showed it wasn't Unbreakable, was it?
it
The
was
one,
Unbreakable.
the Olympic athlete who
Hmm.
was in the pilot of I think it was a B-29, right? And then was taken prisoner. That movie is wild too, and I know it's sanitized as well. I know it's not a fluffy version, but it's definitely not. It's not as hardcore as the book. The book is wild, and the stuff
Yeah.
that they talk about. But like we know that horrible things were happening at those camps. I mean, we just know it, and
And it's not like, and it's so,
but it's so often it's not this, well, they did it, so it's okay if we did it, or it's okay if we did it, then, well, what about the internment camps in the US? You hear that all the time. Um,
but it's
as if it,
so crazy though that internment camp, we know about it. Well, I mean, everyone knows about it in the United States. But then,
right,
like, imagine, and then they like erect these kind of statues and whatnot in the United States. But can you imagine if you go and erect a statue at the Tokyo port? Where the POW camp, the POWs were then like captured into house ships and whatnot, they
right.
would throw a fit. Even
Yeah, true.
Philippines,
True story.
even the Philippines, like they're now an Indo-Pacific partner, right? And so then Japan requested them to take out their statue of Comfort Woman from the
Yeah,
Philippines, because then they're like, oh, we're now friends, so you have to like remove the
that's all
statue.
about saving face, right? It's cultural too. It's
Yeah,
cultural.
yeah, it
So, I
is
mean,
cultural.
so so moving on a touch though, what role should the United States play in promoting historical truth in the region? Is it
I
purely democratic, educational, moral, or all the above?
I don't get paid enough to think about that. That's a US official, like, that's a government's
Policy,
job.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
got
that's
you.
a government's job, right? But I do think that we do need to have more research, and like we do need to learn from history, and definitely like when I was going to the National Archive and like digitizing and scanning, I don't know if you know about this, but like Civil War like documents are way cleaner and like more sturdier than World War II documents, just because during Civil War they were still using cotton paper, but like in
Mm,
World War II resource was really running thin, so they have like onion peel paper, and a
right.
lot of this paper and record keeping is very fragile. And I asked the National Archives, I'm like, hey, you guys have a bunch of money. You can definitely scan and digitize this. Then I can save myself from coming over here and like documenting this. And then they were like, we just don't have the funding to do it. So aren't even like preserved that well, then
Yeah,
how are we
they're like
supposed to?
sitting there falling apart.
Right, they're sitting there falling apart. One time I took like paper out of this box and it was just like crumbles. It's like shredded already. So it's just like, how do you even take a look at this, right? Like, so I think there's a lot we can do in terms of like memory keeping and also keeping historical truth. Just, saving documents itself would be a huge help. So yeah.
Yeah, I do think that the public education on these topics is critical for long-term national security. I just think, and it obviously not just this, but this is an under talked about part of all this big time.
But
So
like,
like,
it's so interesting too, because then like, why don't they talk about like even Pearl Harbor? They don't talk
yeah,
about that
right.
much anymore in the
Exactly,
media.
right? It's wild. So what have you found that resonates with younger audiences?
That's a great question. Well, in 2025, a group of high school students use our website to as a resource to enroll themselves to make a documentary for National History Day. Um, and that was very fascinating. Because they won like the state competition in New Mexico. And so I think like human experimentation is a big one, because just that whole story itself, they did all this wild stuff and they were never punished for it. Like a lot of
Yeah.
those guys later became like a pharmaceutical company like
Yeah.
CEO, and they like got really rich off of this research that they were doing. Um And so that was a good story in and itself, because no one, I mean, it's just, I can't even imagine myself dying that way, to be honest with you. Like
No.
vivisection and being dissected alive, like no one imagines that, and no one imagines like then what happens to medical ethics? There's no medical ethics out there, right? And I thought doctors are supposed to do no harm, and I think we were just talking in pre-show that I hate going to the doctor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with like younger audience, and just like this whole untalked about historical trauma just really resonate with the younger audience. For example, we were going through the Yokohama trial, then we were asking like, why were the Chinese people in Japan then, with the Japanese were accusing them of espionage. But then it turned
Yeah.
out that they were there to do slave labor.
Right. Yeah.
And then they were like, they had a rebellion because shoot, if I was being like captured for like slave labor, I would go and rebel too.
Absolutely.
And I recently uncovered this diary from Robert Peaty, and he was like a British soldier, and every single day in his diary he described how one American died, another American died, and then another American died. So like the American death rate at these Mukden camp was like way more than other Allied soldiers. And like I get the feeling that I'm looking at this diary, or I'm looking at these like reports of human experimentation, and I just
Mhm.
don't understand how bad it was.
Yeah.
Like, because it's just like you read a page, I understand, I understand someone died, but like the horrible condition that they were living under,
Yeah.
it's just not fully understood to me on a page.
Yeah. And or even recorded correctly, because it's the just think of the recorder of the guy writing the journal, how fatigued he is just by all of this. I mean,
Yeah.
he'd be writing about nothing but death, but which he's writing about nothing but death already, but the details of it. And it's just like, it's got to be just wearing after a while. You're just like, oh, well, another one died,
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
So is there any talk of like, I guess the word's reconciliation? I mean, we've had a lot of trials. Are there still trials and stuff going on now?
No, and I talked about reconciliation a few times and with like, elderly people, and they were like, "No, reconciliation. We never got a really like proper apology," which I can
Hmm.
understand, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
just brush things over. But like another point I want to make is that like these Japanese soldiers who were committing these crimes were also facing PTSD at home.
Yeah.
Like, I recently talked to a guy whose father was in the Quantum Army who invaded China, and I'm pretty sure he killed and saw some really terrible things. And the son of this guy told me that his father would then, like, he had only known him as this guy who would hit his mom all the time, but like but then he like found a picture of like albums of like his dad in his younger days. He looked like a really nice guy. So then he was like, well, then there's PTSD for him too, because
Yeah.
also remember his dad coming home and like shouting in the middle of the night, and whatnot. War is nasty, no matter
It
which
just
side
is.
wins.
Just
Yeah,
is.
no matter which side wins, it's
Yeah.
just
There's
like, and
casualties everywhere.
right, and like the war memory, no matter if you were the aggressor or the one who was a victim, just being you're experiencing it, and there's no way in this human mind that you're going to forget about it. And it's like really wild to me when I was reading like Flags of Our Fathers the first time and like watching the movie. Like those people don't understand what PTSD even was back in the day.
Yeah.
And so then they go home and then they experience and there's no way to like explain who you like to someone
Yeah.
else what they have just gone through. Or at the time they will have just called them weak, and then they go on and then they fundraise war bonds and whatnot as war heroes. And then every single time that they had to react that scene while they're raising money, it is
Yeah.
probably
Not cool. It's just
If I
not
was,
cool.
yeah, if
Yeah,
I just play that out.
talk about
So
therapy. Oh my gosh.
yeah, so I think it's really crucial that we remember war, like not just in the Hollywood way where, you dress up in a uniform and you go fight in this battlefield, but really like think about what is going on with everyone in their minds when a war is going on.
Yeah, I think you just kind of answered it, but last question. If every policymaker, policymaker, service member, citizen could understand one truth about the history that you're preserving, what would that be?
That war is awful and that we need to remember what and just never forget when you don't even know the first time it happened.
Right. It's almost like it's being sanitized systematically, right?
Yes, exactly. And the cover up and it's yeah, it's just insane to me that there's just no one trying to preserve this history.
Yeah. All right. Jenny, where can listeners learn more and support you again?
Oh, our website, pacificatrocities.org.
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. It was a enlightening conversation. Yeah. I
Yeah.
I love the history and it's just something that I feel like not just in the Pacific, but it's lost so many places that we just so easily flips away if people don't preserve it. So I really appreciate you doing the work that you do and for coming on Full Spectrum Frontiers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Carry the fire through shadows and storm. Voices of yesterday guiding us on. Echoes of duty, the call we still hear. Building tomorrow with courage, not fear. Stand your ground, keep the watch through the night. Guarding tomorrow where freedom's alive. Through every trial, the truth will endure. Full spectrum frontiers, steady and sure. From fields of the past to horizons unknown, the seeds that we plant are the future we own. Stories of valor, of lessons we've learned, a legacy